Hello and welcome to this presentation on how to choose a dermatoscope. There are two versions of this. One version is the quick version, this one. There is also a more detailed version which actually has some footage of different dermatoscopes being used. We are asked a lot of the time at PCDS about what's the best dermatoscope to buy, and this is a question that comes up so often that I've put together this little presentation for you that should hopefully help you to choose a dermatoscope. There are many types of scope available. These are some pictures of a few of them, but there are many others apart from the ones on here. And the things that we should be thinking about when considering buying a dermatoscope are the things on this list. And I'm going to go through them one by one. So starting off with cost. The cost of a dermatoscope varies from £35 to £50 for the most basic thing off Amazon, up to many thousands of pounds for the really good all singing, all dancing ones. Most of the ones that we're using in general practice are priced at between £700 and £1,000, but there are some others available. So it's really important that we need to research different suppliers to find the best price. People are often tempted to buy second-hand scopes, and they may be a bargain, but they may also be fake or damaged or out of warranty. So do just be careful if you're going to do that. A cheap scope may turn out to be a false economy, and you may find that you want to upgrade to a better scope as you get better at dermoscopy. Modality is the next thing on the list. And by modality, I mean polarized versus non-polarized versus hybrid. The cheapest scopes on the market are the non-polarized only ones. And that's okay for something like picking out a SEB-K, telling the difference between a SEB-K and a melanoma, for example. However, most of the non-polarized only scopes have different qualities of light and colors of light. So the cheap ones will have much more yellow light and it will be projected from the side, whereas the more expensive ones will have whiter light, where the side projection is mitigated by a series of mirrors, so it looks like it's coming from centrally. Where we are talking about non-polarized only scopes as well, most of them will not have a magnetic connector for attaching your camera or your phone to. The other type of modality, single modality, is the polarized only. And polarized only scopes are okay for picking up melanomas and early things like that, but the quality of the polarization matters, and you may find it slightly harder to distinguish the comedo-like openings and milia-like cysts in SEB-Ks. When I'm talking about the quality of polarization here, I'm talking about how easy it is to see the bright white lines in polarized mode. And most of the polarized only scopes are pretty good at that. However, the best type of scope is going to be a hybrid. And just be aware that some of the hybrid scopes have got some rather dodgy quality polarization on them. So the bright white lines don't look particularly bright. And that is particularly true of the Heine Delta 30 and to a lesser extent the Heine Delta 1. So the hybrid scopes in general are the best, and that's because you can flick between polarized and non-polarized modes, so you get the best of both worlds. You can see the comedo-like openings and milia-like cysts in a SEB-K really easily, and you can see the polarization-specific white lines in melanomas and other structures as well. Then, whilst we're on modality, let's have a think about ease of use. And particularly with the hybrid scopes, how easy is it to toggle between the non-polarized and polarized modes? Most of the modern hybrids will have a switch to switch between them. However, some of them will have separate end plates that you have to take off and change, for example, the Dermlite DL1. And some of them will have a bit you have to twist to move between modes. For example, the old style optical art with a handle. The newer ones do have a button to toggle between them. And then how easy is it to find the switch to switch between them, and how easy is it to find the on-off switch? Some of these are easier than others. Some of the scopes, for example, the DL4, just has one switch. So you press it once to turn it on, press it again to switch modes, hold your finger on it to turn it off. Some of them will have a switch that's clearly labelled, and some of them will have a switch that's a little bit more tricky to find. Next thing for us to think about is focus. Now, you can either get a scope that has a fixed focus, so you can't change it, and this will only focus on the bit that is in contact with the end plate. And that's fine if you've got people who don't normally use a scope, because for most of the ordinary dermatoscopes that don't have a fixed focus, you have to extend the end plate a certain amount to get it into focus. And if people don't realise that and try and take a picture without extending the end plate, then the centre of the field is obscured by a shadow. So fixed focus can be quite helpful. And certainly if you've got lots of people using it who wouldn't normally use it, then fixed focus is probably a good option. The other option is to have a look for one that has a marker to set the focus. And this is one where it will show you exactly how far to extend the end plate in order to have it perfectly focused for a flat lesion. So for example, the Dermlight DL3 and DL4 will have those markers. The Opticlar with a handle has a marker. It's a little piece of plastic that you put in. But some of the others, for example, the Heine Delta 1 and Delta 30 don't have that, whereas the Heine Delta 20T does. Oh, sorry. The other thing about the focus is, does the focus change if it's attached to a phone or a camera? So for those that have a magnetic adapter to attach it to a phone or a camera, for some of them, if you try to change the orientation of the phone or camera when you've got it attached to the magnet, that will change the focus. That's a particular problem on the Heine Delta 30 and Heine Delta 1, much less of a problem with any of the other dermatoscopes. Which brings us quite nicely to connectivity. And by this, I mean, how easy is it to connect to a phone in particular? And if you're using a handheld point and shoot camera, then you can just hold it up to the eyepiece. You don't really need a connector because you can use it with one hand. However, with a phone where you've got to line it up, so you need to line it up and hold the phone with one hand and use the other hand to take the picture. It's much easier if you can hold it against the dermatoscope with some kind of adapter. The magnetic adapters generally are the most convenient, and they can be attached to your phone either by having a case for your phone or by having a stick-on magnet that you can attach to a phone case, or you can buy a cradle which will hold your phone and have a magnet on it to attach the dermatoscope to it. The adapter needs to fit comfortably and it needs to move the scope. You need to be able to move the scope on and off comfortably. All of the Dermlight scopes and adapters are very easy to use and to move the scope on and off comfortably. Some of the other adapters can be a little bit more tricky. The Heine ones are absolutely fine. The Opticlar compact one is quite tricky to release it from the magnet sometimes. And then we have the question, will it fit an adapter you already have? If you've managed to find an adapter and you're looking for a scope that will fit the adapter that you have, in general terms, the Dermlight adapters will fit most scopes. The Heine adapters will only fit Heine scopes, and the Opticlar adapters will only fit Opticlar scopes. They have size, and by size, I'm talking about the size of the scope overall. If you are owning the scope yourself as an individual, then a pocket-sized one might be more convenient so you can carry it around with you. Whereas if you are sharing one in the practice, it might be better to have a big one that's just a bit harder to walk off with by mistake. Also, when it comes to size, we need to think about the size of the end plate. And there's two things here. There's the size of the end plate per se. So a large end plate means it can be quite difficult to get into smaller and concave areas, such as the side of the nose, for example. But there's also the size of the area that you can see through the end plate. And this is variable depending on the size of the end plate as well. So this slide demonstrates some different scopes, a few different scopes, and all of them are taken with the same camera that is not zoomed in. And they're taking a picture of this little flower here. And you can see on some of them, we can just see the flower itself. And on others, we can see some of the surrounding flowers as well. That gives you an idea of how much you can see, the field you can see around the outside. Whilst we're on the subject of the end plate, have a little think about hygiene of the end plate. And there's a few things to think about here. Firstly, is it enclosed? A fully enclosed end plate is not going to get dirt or dust on the inside of the end plate. If it's not fully enclosed and you get dust on the inside of the end plate, then the autofocus on your camera may focus on the dust and not on the lesion beyond it. How easy is it to remove it for cleaning? Some of them are very easy to remove, some of them are more difficult. Some are magnetic. For example, the Illuco and the Opticlar Compact have got magnetic end plates, and they're much the easiest to remove and put back on again and to know that they're held in place securely. Some of them will clip on and off, for example, the Dermalite DL4, and that again is easy to remove and to clip back on again, but you do need to make sure it's firmly clipped back on before you go back to using it again. Some of them will screw on, for example, the Dermalite DL2. And again, that's one you need to be very careful that you've screwed it on enough to hold it on, but not so much that when you get some some of your contact fluid, particularly the alcohol hand gel, stuck in the thread, doesn't make it stick and get stuck. So how easy they are to remove for cleaning is important. Then the other thing to think about is general hygiene. And if we're using the dermatoscope to look at bloody lesions or lesions on mucous membranes, it's helpful to have disposable end plate caps. Otherwise, you can always just use a roll of cling film. Many of them will come with disposable end plate caps. So for example, the Opticlars do, most of the Dermalites do, but some of them don't, and that's definitely worth checking. And then with the end plate as well, can you take it off for reducing the effect of pressure so that you can use it in polarized only mode without compressing surface blood vessels, which is particularly useful if you're taking pictures of BCCs. And if you do take it off, is it likely to break? And some of the clip-on ones can be a little bit delicate. And particularly there, just be aware that the Dermalite DL200 hybrid can be slightly delicate because of the three plastic prongs it has holding the end plate out. But it also has the same issue with the clip-on end plates that they can get damaged after a period of time if you're constantly taking them on and off. Next thing to think about is there a small contact end plate available? And this helps you to see particularly things at the side of the nose, for example, or in other concave areas where it's harder to see because you can't get flat up with the end plate. If there is a small contact end plate available, there are two types. There's the proboscis type, which has a little sticky out bit in the middle, and there's a tapered type where it looks almost more like a cone shape. Different scopes come with different types of small contact end plates, and they're usually available separately, but some don't have small contact end plates available at all. And that's definitely worth thinking about if you've got one with a large end plate. But having said that, so long as it's a polarized scope and has polarization, you can just hold it away from the skin without extending the end plate instead. And so you can often rest it on the side of the nose, for example, and still get a decent picture, even without a small contact end plate. So it's not essential, but it is useful for some areas. Next thing is resilience. How delicate or breakable is it overall? And are there any particularly delicate parts? So as I mentioned, the Dermalite DL200 hybrid has those three little plastic pins holding its end plate out, and that's a little bit delicate. Frankly, though, any dermatoscope is going to be delicate. If you drop it, you're going to break it. So don't drop them, be careful with them. And most of them generally are going to be okay. The Opticlar with the handle has different plastic end pieces on it, and that plastic can get a little bit brittle after a few years. And so it is slightly more likely to break. Then we move on to the optics. Now, we've already talked about quality of polarization and how well you can see the bright white lines, but there's also the question of the quality of the images at the edges. And this depends partly on the size of the field of view, but also on how much bending there is of light at the edges. And to demonstrate this, I've taken these pictures through various different dermatoscopes to show you how much the light is bent at the edges and how much you can see through. So all of these are pictures of the same piece of graph paper. And you can see that some of them have got very straight lines and some of them have definitely got some bending at the edges. However, if I refer you back to that picture I showed you earlier of the flowers on the fabric, that bending doesn't make very much difference to the overall quality of the picture. And so it's really not very much of an issue, but it's there just for the people that want to know about it. Next thing, charge and brightness. A few things to consider here. Is it battery powered or is it a rechargeable? The battery powered ones that require you to replace the batteries or to replace rechargeable batteries, for example, when the battery power gets low, the light will be less intense and it becomes harder to see through and harder to get good quality pictures. The rechargeable ones generally tend to be better, so long as you actually keep them charged and so long as they will retain their charge. If it's a rechargeable, think about whether it needs a special adapter, whether it has a stand, or whether it charges via a standard micro USB or a C lead or something like that. And the reason for that is that the special adapters, if you have lost your adapter, you then can't charge your dermatoscope at all. Whereas if it charges on a standard micro USB lead, you can charge it with your phone charger. Some of them will come with a stand for recharging them. And if they do, it's important to make sure that you check that you've got it fully engaged with the stand and charging. So it's helpful to have a little light that tells you if it's in the process of charging, so you can check that you've put it properly into the stand. Because for most of them, if you slide it into the stand and you haven't got it fully engaged, it won't charge. Then the question, does it turn itself off if you leave it on by mistake? So if someone borrows it, turns it on, forgets to turn it off, doesn't know how to turn it off, or accidentally turns it on as they put it away into its case, as happens from time to time, will it automatically turn itself off in order to retain its charge, or will it stay on until the batteries completely run out? And if you've got it with it completely run out and you plug it in, will it work straight away if it's plugged in and charging? Clearly, you'd have to get your patient to stand quite close to your plug if you're going to do that, but some of them will work while plugged in and charging, and some of them, particularly the Heine ones, don't. And so if you plug it in to charge it, you have to unplug it in order to use it, and then you can plug it back in to charge it up again. Another question on charge and brightness, does it have variable degrees of brightness? Several of the scopes available on the market at the moment will have variable degrees of brightness. So you can have, for example, 3 levels of light intensity on the Illuco IDS 1100 and on the Dermlight Delta 1 and the Delta 30. And that's very handy. So you can have it as bright as it goes for taking the photos, or you can have it less bright for comfort if you find that it gives you a headache looking at bright lights that are too bright. And then finally, do you need to keep holding the button to keep it switched on? So some of the early Dermlight polarized only scopes have a button that you need to keep pressed in order to keep it switched on. And the same is true for some of the jewelers loops. So some will have a switch to turn them on and some will have a button that needs to be kept pressed. And the reason that matters is that if you've got one hand holding the scope and pressing the button, you need the other hand free to take your pictures. And if you're trying to do that on a scope that doesn't have a magnetic adapter, for example, in fact, all of the ones where you hold on the button, you don't have a magnetic adapter. You need an extra hand to help you to take the picture on the phone. And then finally, just think about how you're going to look after it and how you're going to protect it. And does it come with a case or a protector? You can always make one if it doesn't come with one, or if you can't get hold of one, that's another option. So here are the list of things to consider when choosing a dermatoscope. And the next thing to think about, of course, is training how to interpret what you see. And pcds.org.uk has lots of details for dermoscopy training courses. We do dermoscopy for absolute beginners, intermediates and advanced dermoscopy. And we're always happy to advise at any of our courses about different dermatoscopes that may be available. Hopefully everyone's found that useful, and hopefully we will see you at one of our courses. Goodbye.